She helped a stranger escape a burning building. He was the Mafia boss who swore to keep her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Emily Mitchell was just another ordinary woman, living a life she thought was as average as could be. A nurse working long shifts at Mercy General Hospital in downtown Manhattan, Emily had seen it all, from minor injuries to major traumas. But nothing could have prepared her for the day her life changed forever. It was late, around midnight, when the fire broke out. Emily had just finished a 12-hour shift in the emergency room, exhausted and eager to get home. She had no idea that her quiet walk to the parking garage would soon turn into a night of chaos. As she walked past the darkened hallways of the hospital, she heard the unmistakable sound of crackling fire. Panic surged through her veins, and she quickly rushed toward the source of the noise. The hallway was filled with thick smoke, and the flashing red lights of the fire alarms only added to the urgency. Without hesitation, Emily sprinted down the corridor, her heart racing in her chest. She had to make sure no one was still inside the building. She reached the stairwell and heard faint cries for help. A man, a stranger, was trapped in the elevator shaft, his face pale with terror as he struggled to escape the thickening smoke. His suit was covered in ash, and his eyes were wide with fear. Without a second thought, Emily reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling him towards the exit. The heat was intense, the air thick with smoke, but Emily's training kicked in. She didn't stop. She couldn't. As they reached the exit, the doors burst open, and they were hit by a gust of cold night air. The fire trucks had just arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance, but it was too late. The building was already consumed by flames. Emily turned to look at the man she had just saved, only to realize something that made her blood run cold. He was no ordinary man. He was the notorious Mafia boss, Matteo Romano, a name she had heard whispered in hushed tones across the city. He had ties to every major crime organization in New York, and no one dared to cross him. Yet, there he was, standing in front of her, his life saved by a nurse who had no idea who he was. As she backed away, her eyes met his, and she saw something there. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. His expression softened, and he spoke in a low, commanding voice. "You saved my life, and now, I swear to protect you. No one will ever hurt you again." His words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She didn't know what to say, but the intensity of his gaze told her that her life was about to change forever. Matteo had made a promise, and in his world, promises meant everything. Emily had no idea what kind of man she had just encountered, but she was about to find out. After the fire, everything seemed to happen in a blur for Emily. She had done her job, saving a man's life, but as the days went on, the weight of that decision began to sink in. The strange man she had rescued from the burning building had been more than just a victim of the fire. Matteo Romano, the Mafia boss, had found his way into her life, and she had no idea how to deal with it. She spent the next few days trying to return to her normal routine at Mercy General, but everything felt different. The halls of the hospital no longer felt familiar, and even the simple task of checking on patients made her stomach turn. There was a constant, unshakable feeling that someone was watching her, and she couldn't shake the memory of Matteo's eyes, cold yet piercing, filled with something she couldn't quite understand. The moment he had spoken those words, "I swear to protect you. No one will ever hurt you again," had stuck with her. Matteo had made her a promise, and she didn't know whether to be thankful or terrified. She hadn't asked for his protection, hadn't wanted any involvement with the dangerous world he came from. She had simply done what any good person would do, help someone in need. Yet now, it seemed that this simple act had tangled her fate with a man who ruled over a world she had never known. Emily's thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her modest apartment building. She had just gotten home from another grueling shift, her body aching from the constant running and the pressure of her work. She had barely taken off her shoes when there was a knock at the door. She opened it cautiously, not knowing what to expect. To her surprise, it was Matteo, standing there, impeccably dressed as usual, his dark eyes locked on hers. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Emily didn't know what to say. Her first instinct was to shut the door, but something in his gaze told her she wouldn't be able to escape. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The apartment was small, modest, the kind of place she could afford on her nurse's salary. But it was hers, and it had always been a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. Matteo didn't seem bothered by the simplicity of it. His presence, however, was anything but simple. He walked in with the confidence of someone used to owning everything he stepped into. "I wanted to check on you," Matteo said, his gaze sweeping over the small living room. "I haven't had the chance to thank you properly for what you did." Emily crossed her arms, her thoughts racing. She didn't want to get tangled in this world of his, didn't want to be a part of anything that involved the Mafia. "You've already thanked me," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I did what anyone would do." Matteo turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You saved my life, Emily. That's not something I take lightly. You might not understand this now, but that act, it means something to me. You mean something to me." His words hung in the air like a weight. Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. She had to stay strong. "I don't need your gratitude," she said firmly. "I did what was right." Matteo stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "And I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. That means something more in my world than it does in yours." Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. There was something dangerous in his tone, something that made her question what kind of man she had really saved. "I don't want your protection," she said, trying to hold her ground. "I didn't ask for it." Matteo's eyes softened, but there was an intensity there that she couldn't ignore. "It's not about asking, Emily. It's about what I've chosen to do. And I'm not going anywhere." He paused, as if contemplating something. "I'm offering you a chance to walk away from all of this. But I can't let you go." Emily's chest tightened. She couldn't deny the fear that was starting to creep into her thoughts. She had never asked for any of this. Yet here she was, standing in front of a man who held the power to change everything in her life, for better or worse. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Matteo's gaze never left hers. "Because you're different. You don't belong in my world, but that's exactly why I need you in it. You see things differently. You care. And in my world, caring is a rare thing." Emily didn't know how to respond. The tension between them was palpable, and for the first time since that night in the burning building, she felt truly scared. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to be a part of your world." Matteo stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "It's not a choice, Emily. You're already part of it. And no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to escape." Days passed since the fire, and Emily couldn't shake the weight of the encounter with Matteo Romano. He had walked into her life like a storm, and no matter how much she tried to return to normal, everything felt different. She had done the right thing. She had saved his life, but in doing so, she had unknowingly tied herself to him, to a world she had no place in, a world that didn't play by the rules she had spent her life following. She had tried to ignore it, to push the thoughts of Matteo and his promise to protect her to the back of her mind, but she couldn't. The feeling of his intense gaze haunted her. The way he had stood in her apartment, making her a promise she didn't want, yet somehow couldn't refuse. She was in over her head, and she knew it. She had never asked for this life, but it seemed as if it had found her anyway. It wasn't long before Matteo started showing up at her apartment, unannounced. He would knock on the door, and there he was, standing in that tailored suit of his presence filling the small space of her apartment like it belonged to him. At first, Emily resisted, trying to make excuses, telling him that she didn't need his protection. But every time he came, he said the same thing, in that deep, commanding voice. "You're mine now, Emily. I don't take promises lightly." He would stay for a few minutes, sometimes an hour, but every visit left her feeling more and more entangled in his world. She tried to push back, telling him she wasn't interested in his world, that she didn't want to be involved with someone like him. But Matteo wasn't a man who listened to rejection. One evening, after another grueling shift at the hospital, Emily walked into her apartment to find Matteo sitting on her couch, waiting for her. He wasn't there by accident. She had no doubt about that. The moment she stepped inside, his dark eyes locked onto hers, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "I told you, Emily, You can't escape me, he said softly. She tried to hold her ground. I don't want to be a part of your world. I'm just a nurse. That's all I've ever been. Matteo stood up, his towering figure moving towards her with deliberate steps. And that's exactly why I need you in my life, he said. You're different. You have a purity to you, a kindness. People like me don't come by that often. Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had never asked for this attention, never wanted it. But the way he spoke, the way his words were laced with something genuine, something she couldn't deny, made her heart race. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against her cheek. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine. I didn't choose this. Life, Emily. It chose me. And now, you're a part of it. Whether you like it or not. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she wasn't the kind of woman who belonged in his world. But as his gaze held hers, something inside of her shifted. His words, the way he looked at her, it made her feel like she was the only person in the room. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, that getting closer to him would only bring more trouble. But she couldn't ignore the way he made her feel, like she was important, like she mattered. I don't want to be a part of your world, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo's expression softened, but only for a moment. Then he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You already are, Emily. There's no turning back now. His hand gently cupped her face, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. She had no idea how she had ended up here, in this strange and dangerous world. But one thing was clear. Matteo Romano was not a man who let go easily. She was in deeper than she realized, and the more she tried to fight it, the more it felt like she was meant to be there. The phone rang, breaking the tension. Emily turned to see the hospital's number flashing on her screen. She quickly answered, her heart still racing from the close encounter with Matteo. Hello, this is Emily, she said, trying to steady her breath. On the other end, the voice of the nurse manager came through, sounding urgent. Emily, we need you back. There's been an emergency. It's a code red. Without a second thought, Emily grabbed her coat and rushed to the door. Matteo didn't stop her. He watched her with an unreadable expression as she walked out, but she could feel his eyes on her even as she closed the door behind her. As she stepped into the elevator, her mind was still spinning. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. There was no turning back. She had saved a mafia boss's life, and now she was tangled in his world. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep within her. Every time she tried to return to her normal routine, the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. Matteo Romano, the mafia boss she had saved from the fire, was still very much a part of her life. His presence, his promise to protect her, and the life he led were all becoming a part of her world, whether she liked it or not. It was impossible to ignore. That evening, after the emergency at the hospital had been dealt with, Emily returned to her apartment. She was exhausted, but the nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't let her rest. When she opened the door, Matteo was sitting in her living room again, as though he had every right to be there. He didn't ask for permission. He simply walked in. I hope you don't mind, he said, looking up at her as if this was just another casual visit. His dark eyes were intense, as always, studying her with that unnerving focus that made her feel both vulnerable and protected at the same time. Emily closed the door behind her, trying to maintain control of the situation. You really have no boundaries, do you? She asked, her voice shaky despite her attempt to sound firm. Matteo's lips curved into a slight smile, but it was different from the cold, calculating smiles he usually wore. This one had an edge to it. Boundaries are for people who don't have power, he said, his tone matter of fact. And you, Emily, are not someone who can simply walk away. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What do you want from me, Matteo? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matteo stood up and walked toward her, his presence filling the room. He was so close now, she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I told you, I want to protect you. You don't understand how dangerous this world is, Emily. You're already in it, whether you realize it or not. Emily took a step back, trying to maintain her composure. I don't want to be in your world, she said, her voice stronger now, though it trembled slightly. I never asked for this. Matteo's eyes darkened, and for a moment, she saw something dangerous flicker in them. You didn't have a choice, Emily. Once you saved my life, You became part of it. Whether you want to be or not. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't know how to respond. Every part of her wanted to reject him, to push him away, but another part, the part that had been drawn to him since that night in the fire, couldn't deny the truth of what he was saying. There was no escaping this. I didn't save you because I wanted anything from you, Emily said, her voice steady now. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Matteo stepped closer, his breath warm against her skin. And now you'll let me take care of you, he said softly. You don't have to fight this, Emily. I'm offering you protection, a life you never dreamed possible. Emily felt her pulse quicken, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't want to admit it, but she was tempted. Matteo's world was dark, dangerous, and filled with people who lived by their own set of rules, but the allure of the power he offered was undeniable. She had always struggled to make ends meet, always worked harder than anyone else just to survive. The idea of being taken care of not having to worry about money, safety, or what the next day might bring, was tempting. But the cost of that comfort was too high. I don't want your protection, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt a pang of doubt. Matteo studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. You're lying to yourself, he said quietly. Deep down, you know this is what you need. You're tired, Emily. You've been running on empty for so long, trying to do everything on your own. I'm offering you a chance to rest. His words hit her like a wave, crashing over her defenses. She didn't want to need him. She didn't want to be a part of his world. But in that moment, she felt the truth of it. She was exhausted. I don't belong in your world, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Matteo's gaze softened, and he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. You belong with me now, he said, his voice barely audible. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine. And I'll make sure you're safe. No one will hurt you again. Emily didn't know how to respond. She was caught in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by a man who had made a promise she didn't know if she could trust. But as he stood there, holding her gaze, she realized one thing. She wasn't as sure of herself as she had thought. Maybe she had already stepped too far into his world to turn back. The next few days were a whirlwind for Emily. As much as she tried to go back to her routine at Mercy General Hospital, she couldn't escape the constant pull of Matteo Romano. He had made it clear that his protection wasn't optional, and though she had resisted it at first, the truth was undeniable. She was already involved in his world, whether she liked it or not. Matteo didn't allow her to forget for long. He was everywhere. His messages, his gifts, his unexpected visits to her apartment were constant reminders of the promise he had made. At first, she tried to ignore him, tried to push him away. But each time he showed up, with that intense gaze and that aura of power, it became harder to deny that something was shifting inside of her. Matteo had told her that no one would hurt her again, and though she hated to admit it, his presence did make her feel safer, even if it also made her feel more vulnerable than ever before. One evening, after an especially long shift at the hospital, Emily returned to her apartment to find it unusually quiet. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, and just wanted to take a hot shower and forget the world for a while. But when she opened the door to her apartment, she saw him. Matteo. He was sitting on her couch, leaning back with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His dark eyes followed her as she stepped inside, his expression unreadable but intense. She froze for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob. You didn't have to wait for me, Emily said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I told you I'd be back, Matteo replied, his voice calm but commanding as always. You're tired. I'm here to make sure you don't have to worry about anything tonight. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure why she was still resisting him. The truth was, in the quiet of the apartment, with the weight of the day's stress still on her shoulders, the idea of someone taking care of her felt strangely comforting. But she wasn't ready to admit that yet. I don't need your help, Matteo, she said, her voice firm despite the weakness she felt inside. I've been managing fine on my own. Matteo stood up, his tall figure towering over her, as he moved closer. You've been managing, yes, he said, his voice softening. But you've also been exhausted, fighting a battle you don't have to fight. Let me help you. You don't need to carry all of this alone. Emily swallowed, feeling a pang of something she couldn't quite explain. Was it relief? Fear? She couldn't tell. Matteo was too close now, standing in front of her, his presence overwhelming. He lifted his hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers grazing her skin. She felt her heart skip a beat at the unexpected touch. "I don't want to be a burden to you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. He smiled, though it was a smile that held both understanding and something else, something deeper, more dangerous. "You're not a burden, Emily. You never were." His voice was low, and there was a sincerity in it that made her chest tighten. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm just offering you what I can. Protection, safety, a life where you don't have to worry about the things that keep you up at night." She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him that she didn't need him, that she didn't want any part of the dangerous world he represented. But when she looked at him, saw the quiet intensity in his eyes, she found herself hesitating. The weight of his words, of the promise he had made to protect her, settled in her mind like a heavy stone. Matteo took a step back, giving her space. "I'll be here whenever you need me, Emily," he said, his voice still steady, still holding that quiet power. "But I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Emily standing in the middle of the room, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what was happening to her. She had always been in control of her life, always relied on herself to get through the hard times. But now, Matteo had inserted himself into her world, and somehow, she felt both terrified and relieved. She wasn't sure what to make of it. As the door clicked shut behind him, Emily stood there for a moment, staring at the space he had just occupied. Was it really that simple? Could she just let go and allow someone else to take care of her, to protect her from the dangers of the world? Or was she making a terrible mistake by getting tangled in the web of a mafia boss who could destroy her just as easily as he could protect her? The uncertainty gnawed at her. But as the night wore on and she finally allowed herself to rest, she couldn't deny the one thing she had never considered before. She was no longer alone. Matteo's promise had changed everything. And whether she liked it or not, she was a part of his world now. The days that followed Matteo's promise felt like a dream, one that Emily couldn't wake up from, no matter how hard she tried. She went to work at Mercy General Hospital, went through the motions of her life, but something inside of her had shifted. Matteo had become a constant presence in her thoughts, his words echoing in her mind. "You're not alone anymore." It wasn't just the promise of protection that unnerved her. It was the pull, the connection she felt toward him, something she couldn't deny no matter how hard she tried. He had made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere, and for some reason, she hadn't told him to leave. The longer she resisted, the harder it became to walk away. One evening, as Emily was finishing her shift at the hospital, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Dinner at 8. Be ready. Don't be late. Matteo." It was a simple message, yet it carried so much weight. He had made it clear that she didn't have a choice in this. But something about his directness made her heart race. She didn't know why he had invited her to dinner. Was it another way of drawing her deeper into his world? Was he trying to get her to accept something that she couldn't bring herself to understand? She didn't have answers, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to ignore his request. At 8 that evening, she stood at the door of her apartment, adjusting her dress. She had chosen something simple, something that wouldn't draw attention, but the nervous energy inside her made it hard to focus on anything else. As she made her way to the elevator, she felt her phone buzz again. This time, it was a picture of a black car parked outside. "I'll be waiting," Matteo had written. Emily's heart pounded as she walked outside to meet him. The car was sleek and imposing, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in her neighborhood. She opened the door to find Matteo already inside, dressed in a tailored black suit, looking every bit the part of a man who owned everything in sight. "You're on time," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I like that." He leaned back in his seat as the car began to drive. Emily didn't say anything, unsure of what to expect from the evening. Was this a date? Or was it something else entirely? She couldn't ignore the fact that there was something magnetic about him. Despite everything, despite the dangers and the warnings in her head, there was a part of her that felt drawn to him. "You look beautiful," Matteo said after a few moments of silence. His voice was low, but there was sincerity in it that made her heart skip a beat. "You don't have to say that," Emily replied, her voice betraying her nervousness. I'm not just saying it because I have to, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers. I mean it. You're different from the women I'm used to. Emily didn't know what to say. The tension between them was thick, but for the first time in days, she found herself thinking about something other than her resistance to his world. As they arrived at the restaurant, a high-end Italian place with private booths and dim lighting, Matteo opened the door for her. She stepped out, still unsure of what this night would bring, but the thought of turning back never crossed her mind. He had already pulled her into his orbit, and she couldn't deny the pull. Inside, they were led to a secluded booth. In the back, the ambience was elegant, quiet, with low murmurs of conversation and the clink of silverware against fine china. A waiter approached and Matteo ordered for both of them, speaking in a language Emily didn't understand. As they sat down, Matteo's gaze never left hers. There was a calm intensity about him that made it impossible for her to look away. I want you to know that I'm not doing this because I need anything from you, he said after a long pause. I'm doing this because I want you in my life. I don't want to control you, Emily. I want to protect you. Emily felt her heart racing again, unsure of how to respond. Everything he said was both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. She had always prided herself on her independence, but with Matteo, she didn't know where her will ended and his influence began. I don't know if I can accept that, Emily said, her voice soft. I'm not used to this kind of life. Matteo's expression softened slightly, though the intensity remained. You don't have to accept everything at once. Take your time, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. But know this, I'll be here when you're ready. The night stretched on with conversation flowing between them, though much of it centered on Matteo's world, his business, and the people he was constantly surrounded by. Emily tried her best to keep up, but the more she learned about him, the more overwhelming it became. The Mafia was not a world she could easily escape from, and Matteo wasn't the kind of man who would let her go once she was a part of it. As the evening ended, Matteo escorted her back to the car. The tension between them was palpable, but something inside Emily shifted. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she couldn't deny that the feelings she had for Matteo were growing. The man who had promised to protect her, the man who had pulled her into his dangerous world, was becoming someone she couldn't ignore. And despite all her resistance, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The days following their dinner were filled with an unsettling silence, but not the kind that Emily had expected. Matteo's presence lingered in the back of her mind, even when he wasn't physically there. It was as if his words, his promise to protect her, had somehow taken root in her thoughts. She had tried to keep her distance, but the more she tried to deny the pull between them, the stronger it seemed to become. She didn't want to admit it, but Matteo was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was dangerous, yet there was something undeniably magnetic about him. It wasn't just his power or his wealth. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race even when she tried to stay calm. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult shift at the hospital, Emily arrived home to find a black envelope waiting for her. It was neatly placed on the kitchen counter, the sleek paper standing out against the clutter of her apartment. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Inside, there was a note written in elegant script. I've taken care of everything. You'll never have to worry again. Matteo. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The message was simple, but it carried a weight that she couldn't ignore. She had no idea what he meant by taking care of everything. But the idea of being free from worry, of being protected, was tempting. She didn't realize how much she had been carrying on her own until the moment she read those words. She wanted to push him away, to reject his help, but a small part of her felt relieved. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the silence was broken only by the sound of her phone buzzing. Matteo's name appeared on the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. I'll pick you up at 8. Or something nice, the message read. Emily stared at the phone for a long moment, the conflict within her growing stronger. She had promised herself that she would keep her distance, that she wouldn't get involved with him. But something about the way he always seemed to show up, the way he made her feel both safe and terrified, kept drawing her in. She didn't know what this was, this strange connection between them, but it was hard to deny. At 8 o'clock, the sound of a car pulling up outside her apartment was enough to send her heart racing. She opened the door to find Matteo standing there, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice calm, but laced with something deeper. Emily's stomach fluttered, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. "What's all this, Matteo?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile that made her wonder what he was thinking. "Just a little dinner," he replied. "No more, no less. I think it's time we got to know each other better." The drive to the restaurant was quiet, but the tension between them was palpable. Matteo's presence seemed to fill the car, his energy almost tangible. Emily wasn't sure if she was more afraid or drawn to him, but she couldn't help the way her heart skipped a beat every time their eyes met. As they arrived at the restaurant, Matteo opened the door for her, his hand brushing against hers as she stepped out of the car. They were led to a private table in the back, and as they sat down, Emily couldn't help but notice how different this was from anything she had ever experienced. The restaurant was luxurious, the kind of place where the wealthy dined in private, away from prying eyes. It was elegant, intimate, and everything about it screamed power. But it was Matteo who commanded attention, not the surroundings. He was a man who moved with purpose, whose every word held weight. As they ordered their food, the conversation shifted to business, to the world Matteo inhabited, to the people he controlled. Emily tried to keep up, but the more he spoke, the more she realized how little she understood of the life he led. "You've never had to worry about anything, have you?" Matteo asked, his voice quiet but probing. Emily was taken aback by the question. "What do you mean?" "You've never had to worry about safety, about money, about who you can trust," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've lived in your own little world, trying to make ends meet, working hard to survive. But you don't have to anymore." Emily's chest tightened. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted any of this." Matteo leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "You didn't have to ask, Emily. I'm offering you something you can't get on your own." "And what's that?" she asked, her heart racing. "Security," he said simply. "A life where you don't have to worry about what tomorrow will bring. A life where you don't have to struggle." The words were tempting. She could feel it, the lure of a life free from worry, free from the constant pressure of making ends meet. But at what cost? "I don't want to be a part of this world, Matteo," she said, shaking her head. "I don't belong here." Matteo's expression softened, but there was a steeliness in his eyes that remained. "You do belong here, Emily," he said, his voice low. "Whether you accept it or not, you're a part of my world now." The dinner continued in silence after that, the weight of his words hanging heavy between them. Emily wasn't sure what she was getting into, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The weeks following the dinner at the luxurious restaurant were a blur for Emily. She spent her days at Mercy General, going through her usual routine, but her nights were a different story. Matteo had made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere, and as much as she tried to resist his presence in her life, it was becoming impossible. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how deeply his world had already infiltrated hers. There was no turning back now. Each day brought new challenges. Emily could no longer deny the fact that her life was no longer her own. It wasn't just about the material things Matteo had given her, although they were lavish and tempting. It was about the sense of security, the promise he had made to protect her. She couldn't help but feel drawn to him, despite the danger he represented. He wasn't like anyone she had ever known. He was ruthless, powerful, and yet, there was something undeniably caring about the way he protected her, something that made her question everything she thought she knew. One evening, after a particularly exhausting shift at the hospital, Emily found herself standing at her apartment door, contemplating the strange twist her life had taken. Her phone buzzed with a message from Matteo. "I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. We need to talk." She had gotten used to his unexpected visits, but this one felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. When the knock came at the door, she opened it to find him standing there, as usual, dressed impeccably in a black suit. His presence, as always, filled the room. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her with that intense gaze of his, a gaze that seemed to see through her, as though he knew her better than she knew herself. "What's going on, Matteo?" Emily asked, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his movements smooth and confident. "I've been watching, Emily," he said, his voice low. "Watching you. Watching how you handle everything. You think you can keep fighting on your own, but you're exhausted. I see it in your eyes." Emily took a step back, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. "I'm fine." Matteo's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the steel in his voice. "No, you're not," he said gently. "And that's why I'm here. You've been fighting for so long, trying to make it on your own, but now you're mine. And I'm going to make sure you never have to fight again." His words hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid or relieved. Part of her wanted to fight back, to tell him she didn't need him. But another part of her, the part that had been silently longing for someone to take control, to take care of her, felt comforted by his words. Matteo reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Emily," he said softly. "I'll handle everything. You just need to trust me." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. It was tempting to say yes, to let go and allow him to take care of everything. But the reality of who he was, the world he came from, was too much to ignore. She had seen what he was capable of. She had seen the way people feared him, the way they obeyed his every command. She didn't belong in his world. "I don't know if I can trust you, Matteo," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." Matteo's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that softened. "You don't have to trust anyone but me," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'll take care of you. I'll keep you safe. That's all that matters." Emily stood there, staring at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She wanted to walk away, to return to the life she knew, the life where she didn't have to rely on anyone. But the truth was, she didn't know how to live that life anymore. Matteo had made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, the promise of safety, the promise of being taken care of. As much as she hated to admit it, she didn't want to let go of that feeling. "You can't keep me locked in your world, Matteo," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not like them. I'm not like you." Matteo stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I don't want to lock you in, Emily," he said softly. "I want you to choose to be with me. I want you to choose a life where you don't have to fight anymore." Emily closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make sense of it all. But as she opened her eyes and looked up at him, she knew one thing for certain. Her life was never going to be the same again. Matteo was right. She wasn't alone anymore. And the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized she didn't want to be. Emily had always prided herself on being strong, independent, and capable of handling everything on her own. But now, with Matteo in her life, things were becoming complicated. She had tried so hard to keep herself distanced from him, to tell herself that this was a mistake, that she could walk away, but the pull of his presence was undeniable. Every time they were together, it felt like something inside of her shifted. Matteo's words, his actions, had started to weave themselves into the fabric of her life, and she found herself wondering if she even wanted to escape anymore. She had been toying with the idea of letting go for days, but something about him made her question everything she had known. Matteo was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and there was no doubting that he wanted her. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was more than that. He had shown her a side of life she had never known, one filled with luxury, security, and power, and for the first time in a long while, Emily found herself wondering if that was enough. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. Was she falling for him? Or was it just the weight of everything he represented, his power, his promise to protect her, the comfort he offered, that was drawing her in? She couldn't decide, but what she did know was that she was in deeper than she had ever imagined. Matteo had made it clear that he wouldn't let her go, that she was now part of his world, and despite her reservations, Emily found herself accepting the truth of his words. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, the phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. The caller ID read Matteo. Her heart skipped a beat, and she picked up the phone without thinking. "Emily." Matteo's voice came through, smooth and steady, as always. "I need to see you. There's something we need to discuss." She felt a surge of apprehension. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll explain when I see you," he said. "I'll be there in an hour." She didn't argue. She had learned long ago that arguing with Matteo was pointless. He was used to getting his way, and for some reason, she found herself accepting that. When the hour passed, and she heard the knock at her door, Emily was already standing, her nerves on edge. She opened the door to find him standing there, just as composed as ever, dressed in his usual tailored suit, the look of a man who owned everything in his path. "Come in," Emily said, stepping aside to let him in. Matteo didn't waste any time. He walked past her, taking a seat at the small dining table she had set up. "I'm listening," Emily said, her voice tight with curiosity. Matteo looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "I've made some arrangements, Emily," he began. "There are people who know what I'm doing, and they know about you now. I don't like people knowing things about my life that aren't supposed to be known." He paused, letting his words sink in. "That's why I've decided it's time for you to move. You need to be in a safer place." Emily felt a jolt of fear run through her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can't stay here anymore." "No," Matteo said, his tone firm. "I won't risk anything happening to you. There's a place for you, a house with better security, away from everything that's been going on. You'll be safer there. It's time for you to leave this apartment behind." Emily felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she understood his need to protect her, to keep her out of harm's way, but on the other, the thought of leaving her life behind, leaving everything she knew, was terrifying. "I don't want to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is all I have. This is my home." Matteo's gaze softened, but his expression remained determined. "This place isn't safe anymore, Emily. I'll take care of everything, I promise. But you need to trust me. This is the only way." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. Matteo believed what he was saying. He had made a decision, and there was no room for negotiation. "I don't want you to be afraid," Matteo said, his voice softer now. "This is for your own good. You won't have to worry anymore." Emily stood still, processing his words, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had never imagined her life would come to this, that she would be forced to leave everything behind and enter a world that wasn't her own. But the truth was, Matteo's world had already become hers in ways she couldn't explain. "Okay," she finally said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I'll trust you." Matteo smiled, though it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You won't regret this, Emily. I promise you that." The rest of the evening was a blur as Matteo made the arrangements for her move. He took control of everything, from the logistics to the security. Emily didn't have to lift a finger. But as she packed her things, she realized that this was it. There was no going back. She was about to step fully into his world, a world she wasn't sure she belonged in, but a world she knew she couldn't escape. And as she looked around her apartment one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something she couldn't control, something that would change her life forever. The next few days were filled with packing, organizing, and an overwhelming sense of finality. Emily had accepted that she was moving into a new world, one that she had no choice but to enter. Matteo had arranged everything, from the logistics to the security. He had already set up a house for her, a place that was safer, more secure. She felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety as she looked around her apartment, the place that had been her sanctuary for so long. It was now a memory, just another chapter of her life that she was closing. As she finished packing, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right decision. Could she really trust Matteo? Was this the life she wanted? Or was she being drawn deeper into a world she couldn't control? She had always been in control of her own life, making decisions, facing challenges, and dealing with the consequences. But now, it felt like everything was out of her hands. Matteo's world was powerful, dangerous, and completely foreign to her. She didn't know what to expect, and she didn't know how to navigate this new life that awaited her. But one thing was certain. Matteo wasn't going to let her walk away. He had made that clear, and she had agreed, even if she wasn't sure why. The sound of a car pulling up outside pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked out the window and saw the black car waiting for her. Matteo was already there, standing by the vehicle, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings as usual. Emily took one last look at her apartment and grabbed her bags. As she walked out the door, she felt a sense of finality. There was no going back now. Matteo opened the car door for her, and she climbed in, her heart pounding in her chest. The car ride was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the engine. Matteo didn't speak, but the tension in the air was palpable. She knew he was watching her, gauging her every reaction, but she didn't know what to say. They arrived at the house just as the sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over everything. The house was larger than anything Emily had ever seen. It was modern, sleek, and intimidating in its beauty. It stood at the edge of a sprawling estate, surrounded by security gates and high walls. Everything about it screamed power. Matteo led her inside, his hand gently guiding her as she stepped through the front door. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, with polished marble floors, large windows that let in natural light, and expensive artwork adorning the walls. Everything about it was designed to make a statement. "Welcome to your new home," Matteo said, his voice low. Emily stood there, her mouth dry. "This is too much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never asked for this." Matteo turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said softly, "but you don't have to worry about anything anymore. You're safe here." He stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "I'll take care of you, Emily. This is your life now. No more struggling. No more fear. Just peace." Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She didn't know how to feel. Part of her wanted to run, to escape this life that Matteo had brought her into. But another part of her, the part that had been yearning for something more, for someone to take care of her, to protect her, couldn't help but feel comforted by his words. As much as she wanted to reject everything he was offering, part of her wanted to believe in it. She had never known a life like this, a life where she didn't have to worry, where someone else took care of the details. But she also knew that it came with a price. Matteo wasn't offering her this life out of the goodness of his heart. There was always a price to pay in his world, a world that she wasn't sure she belonged in. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. Matteo stepped closer, his hand brushing against her arm. "You don't have to do anything. Just trust me," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only made her feel more conflicted. He was a man who lived in a world of shadows, a world of power and violence, and she had been pulled into it without fully understanding the consequences. But in that moment, as she looked into his eyes, she realized something. She had already made a choice. She had chosen to trust him. She had chosen to let him take care of her, even if she wasn't sure what that meant for her future. "Okay," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I'll stay." Matteo smiled, his eyes softening for the first time. "You won't regret this, Emily. I promise you." And with that, she stepped fully into his world, a world where she was no longer in control, but one where she was safe, at least for now. As the days passed in the grand house Matteo had given her, Emily couldn't shake the strange sense of displacement she felt. The house was beautiful, filled with everything she could possibly need, and yet it felt alien to her. It wasn't her home, not in the way her small apartment had been, even though it was cramped and filled with memories of late nights studying and constant worry. Here, there was no worry, just luxury, just protection, just Matteo. He had kept his word, securing everything she needed, ensuring her safety at every turn. Yet the weight of his world, the one he had invited her into, hung over her like a storm cloud. Every day was another step deeper into a life she hadn't asked for, but one she was now a part of. She had tried to adjust, tried to convince herself that this was better, but there were moments, late at night when she lay awake in the vastness of the new house, that she questioned everything. The silence of the place, the way it echoed with emptiness, made her feel small and vulnerable, even though Matteo had promised to protect her. It wasn't just the mansion or the people who worked for Matteo. It was the realization that this life came with a price. It was the life she would have to live if she stayed with him. She had agreed to trust him, to allow him to take care of her. But how far would that protection go? What would it cost her in the end? It was a question she couldn't answer, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Matteo, on the other hand, seemed unaffected by these thoughts. He continued to give her everything she needed, both emotionally and materially, and it was clear that he wanted her to accept this life. Every morning he would check in on her, always making sure she had everything she needed, always making sure she was comfortable, always making sure she was safe. His eyes, dark and intense, always held that promise, that quiet assurance that nothing could harm her as long as he was around. But Emily still wasn't sure if that was enough. One afternoon, as she was walking through the garden, trying to clear her head, Matteo approached her, his footsteps steady on the gravel path. He didn't speak at first, just watched her, and she felt the familiar weight of his gaze on her. "You've been distant," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Is something wrong?" Emily hesitated, unsure how to answer. She wanted to tell him everything. How confused she felt, how overwhelmed she was by everything that had happened. But she knew that telling him the truth would only pull her deeper into his world, into a world where there was no turning back. "No," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm just trying to get used to everything." Matteo nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she was letting on. "I know it's a lot," he said, stepping closer. "But I promise you, I'm doing everything to keep you safe. I won't let anything happen to you. You're not alone anymore." The way he said it, with such certainty, made her heart beat faster. There was no denying the truth in his words. She had never felt more protected, more secure, but that security came with a cost, one she wasn't ready to fully face yet. "I know," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "But I'm not used to this life, Matteo. I don't know if I can fit into it." Matteo reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to fit into it, Emily," he said, his voice soothing. "You just have to trust me. This is the life I can give you. It's safe. It's everything you need." She looked up at him, the words hanging between them like a barrier she couldn't cross. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that he was offering her something real, something better than the life she had been living. But there was a part of her that still felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong in this world of power, wealth, and control. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Matteo's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You don't have to be ready, Emily," he said quietly. "I'll help you get there. You're not alone." For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of them, standing in the garden, the promise of something more hanging between them. It was tempting to let go, to surrender to the life he was offering, but something inside her still resisted. She had always prided herself on being independent, on making her own choices, and the idea of giving that up was difficult to accept. But as she looked into Matteo's eyes, she knew she couldn't keep resisting. His world was already her world. She had already chosen it when she chose him. "I don't know if I can ever fully accept this," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Matteo smiled gently, his eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to accept everything all at once, Emily. Just trust that I'll be here for you. Trust that this is where you belong." As he stepped back, Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back. And deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The days following Matteo's words were filled with a new kind of tension. Emily felt like she was constantly walking a fine line, trying to maintain some semblance of the life she once knew, while also being pulled deeper into Matteo's world. She had never imagined that something so small, a simple act of saving a life, would change everything for her. And yet, as the days wore on, she realized that she was no longer the same person. The quiet, solitary life she had once valued now seemed distant, almost foreign. Matteo had offered her a life of safety, luxury, and protection, but in doing so, he had also taken away her autonomy. She didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, she was grateful. She had seen what happened to people in his world, people who didn't have his protection. And yet, the more time she spent with him, the more she felt like she was being pulled into a world she couldn't fully understand. It was a world of power and danger, a world where loyalty was paramount, but so was the constant threat of betrayal. One evening, Matteo had invited her to a gathering at one of his properties. It was an extravagant mansion on the outskirts of the city, filled with guests who seemed to be as powerful and intimidating as Matteo himself. As she walked into the grand foyer, Emily felt out of place. The men and women around her were dressed in designer clothes, their conversations laced with power and wealth, their voices low and guarded. It was clear that this wasn't her world. She had never felt so small, so out of her element. Matteo appeared beside her, as always, confident and poised. Don't worry, Emily, he said, his voice soothing. You're with me. No one here would dare make you feel uncomfortable. Despite his reassurance, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. She tried to blend in, to act like she was part of the crowd, but her discomfort was palpable. Matteo seemed to sense it, and he gently guided her toward a quieter corner of the room. Are you okay? He asked, his eyes searching her face. I'm fine, Emily said, though her voice lacked conviction. I just don't fit in here, Matteo. This isn't me. He smiled softly, his expression one of understanding. I know it's overwhelming, but you'll get used to it. In time, you'll see that you belong here as much as anyone else. His words were meant to comfort, but Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The more time she spent in Matteo's world, the more she realized that there were things about him, and about the people he surrounded himself with, that made her uneasy. There was a darkness in their eyes, a coldness to their smiles, that spoke of a life she didn't fully understand, a life built on power and fear. As the evening progressed, Matteo's attention was divided between Emily and the other guests. She couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to defer to him, how his mere presence commanded respect. It was as if he was untouchable, a king in his own right. Emily found herself standing alone, watching him from across the room, the distance between them growing. She wanted to feel a sense of belonging, to feel that this life was the one she was meant for, but the more she observed, the more she felt like an outsider. As the night wore on, Matteo returned to her side, sensing her unease. What's wrong? He asked, his voice quiet but filled with concern. I don't belong here, Emily admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. This isn't my world, Matteo. It's too much. Too dangerous. Matteo's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I never wanted to put you in a position where you'd feel like this, Emily. I wanted to give you everything, safety, comfort, security. But I understand that it's a lot to take in. Emily looked up at him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I don't know if I can live in this world, Matteo, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can be the person you want me to be. Matteo gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, he said softly. I don't want to change you, Emily. I just want to protect you, to give you a life without fear. You don't have to fight anymore. His words were soothing, and for a moment, Emily believed him. But as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this world than he was letting on. She knew that being with him meant accepting everything, the power, the danger, the secrecy. She didn't know if she was ready for that. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Matteo's eyes darkened slightly, and he leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead in a soft, almost tender kiss. You don't have to be ready, he said, his voice low and reassuring. I'll be here, Emily. I'll always be here, no matter what. As he spoke, Emily felt the weight of his words settle deep within her. She had made a choice when she decided to trust him, and now, there was no turning back. But the question remained, could she truly live in his world, or would she lose herself in it? As the weeks passed, Emily's life continued to change in ways she never imagined. She had accepted the world that Matteo had brought her into, but with each passing day, the weight of her decision grew heavier. The promise of safety and luxury that he had offered her was undeniable, but it came at a cost she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. Matteo had shown her a life where she didn't have to worry about anything, where she was constantly protected, but with that protection came the constant reminder of who he was and the world he controlled. The tension between them was palpable. Matteo had given her everything she needed, but it was clear that he wanted more than just her acceptance. He wanted her trust. He wanted her to fully embrace the life he had built, to be a part of his world, and that scared Emily. The more she got to know him, the more she saw the darkness that lingered behind his eyes, the ruthlessness that made him a leader in his world. She had seen him in action, how he controlled everything around him with ease, how people feared him and respected him in equal measure. She knew that she would never fully understand the extent of his world, but she also knew that she couldn't walk away from it. The past few weeks had been a blur of meetings, parties, and events, all orchestrated by Matteo to introduce her to his world. She had met his associates, powerful men and women who worked for him, and though they treated her with respect, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Every conversation felt like an act, a performance where she was playing a role she didn't know how to play. One evening, as she sat in the living room of the grand house Matteo had provided for her, she found herself lost in thought. The silence of the house was deafening, and the weight of her decisions hung heavy on her shoulders. She heard the sound of footsteps behind her and turned to see Matteo walking into the room. His presence filled the space, and for a moment, Emily forgot everything that had been weighing on her. "Are you all right?" Matteo asked, his voice soft yet filled with concern. Emily nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she lied. Matteo didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer to her, his eyes searching her face as if trying to read her thoughts. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said gently. "I know this isn't easy. I never wanted to force you into my world, but now that you're here, I won't let you go." Emily swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to be a part of your world." Matteo's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "I know, Emily," he said, "but you're here now, and I'm not going to let you face this alone. I'll protect you, no matter what." She felt the weight of his words sink in, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe in them. She wanted to believe in him, in the promise of safety he had given her. But deep down, she knew that there was no escaping this world, no escaping Matteo. "I don't know what to do," Emily admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep living like this." Matteo pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said softly. "You just have to trust me. I'll take care of everything." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace. She closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, and allowed herself to be enveloped by his presence. She didn't know what the future held, but for the moment, she didn't care. She was no longer alone. As the days passed, Emily slowly began to accept her place in Matteo's world. She had never imagined a life like this, one filled with power and wealth, but she couldn't deny that it was a life she had been drawn into. She had chosen this path, whether consciously or not, and now there was no turning back. Matteo continued to show her the world he controlled, but he also showed her the man he was beneath the surface. He wasn't just the powerful mafia boss everyone feared. He was also the man who cared for her, who promised to protect her, and who made her feel safe in ways she had never felt before. Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to fully embrace this life, but she knew that she had made her choice. She had chosen Matteo, and that meant accepting everything that came with him. As she stood by the window, looking out at the world she had entered, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found something she never expected to find, a sense of belonging. She was no longer just Emily, the nurse from the small apartment. She was Matteo's, and that meant everything. The life she had once known was gone, but in its place was a new world, one that was dark, dangerous, and filled with secrets. But it was also a world where she wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I hope you're ready for an intense journey filled with passion, power, and danger in this dark romance. Emily, an ordinary woman, finds herself entangled in a world she never asked for when she saves the life of Matteo, a notorious mafia boss. As they navigate their growing attraction and undeniable connection, Emily is pulled deeper into Matteo's world, a life filled with luxury, danger, and control. In this gripping dark romance, Emily must face the choices she's made and the life that Matteo has chosen for her. Can she truly survive in this world of shadows, or will the darkness consume her? With each step, the line between love and fear becomes increasingly blurred, and Emily must decide if she can embrace this dark romance or walk away. From the moment she enters Matteo's life, everything changes, and the question remains, will the dark romance she's fallen into be her salvation or her doom? Join Emily and Matteo in this twisted tale of love, power, and betrayal, where every decision could lead to a new chapter in this dark romance.